What makes something right? What makes something wrong? Is it because there's a law against it or for it? Is it because there's an authority that says something? What makes anything right or wrong? One day I was driving to work. This was a long time ago. I was living in Arizona at the time, and I was working at the Camelback SDA Church, and I was on my way to my office listening to the morning DJ in their drive time banter. And the DJ asked his radio audience to call in and answer a question. And the question was, if the law against murder was suspended for one day, who would you kill? Now, I had never thought about that question before, and I did not call in, but it was interesting to me to hear how entertaining it was, for some people at least, to suggest who they would like to see done away with. And you know, to be fair, it was all done in good fun. I don't think there was any serious evil being expressed. People suggested, you know, celebrities and musicians and politicians and all the usual suspects. But it did bother me, however, that the prospect of killing somebody could be entertainment, but then I guess that shouldn't surprise me given how we usually entertain ourselves with media that we watch. But I wondered if the only thing that keeps you from committing murder is that there's a law against it, I'm not sure I want to be your next door neighbor. So what is it that makes murder wrong? Is it because it's in the Ten Commandments? In Matthew 5, verses 21 to 32, Jesus talks about what fulfilling the law looks like. He goes to the heart of two very prominent commandments. You shall not murder, and you shall not commit adultery. And he introduces each one by saying, you have heard, but I tell you. Here's a brief summary of his teaching there. You know it's wrong to commit murder, but you also violate the commandment when you treat people with contempt and refuse to reconcile with your brother. You know it's wrong to commit adultery, but you also violate the commandment when you are unfaithful in any way, even if it's just in your thoughts. Now, if you think about it, that teaching could be kind of intimidating. What is Jesus really doing here? Is Jesus adding to the law? Is he interpreting the law more strictly? Is he replacing the Ten Commandments with something else? What is going on here? let's take a closer look at this passage. So read with me, and you can read what's on the screen if you want, or open your own Bible. And I'll read aloud. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. You have heard that our ancestors were told, "You must not murder." But I say, if you commit murder, you are I'm going to have to get my glasses out here. I'm sorry. I knew I was forgetting something. Okay. You have heard that our ancestors were told, "You must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment." But I say, if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you are in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. I have to say right now, I love the children's story this morning. If you don't get anything out of what I just, what I'm about to say, just go back to the children's story. It's got everything in it. But as I was watching the kids this morning, and Deb said the word idiot, I saw some of the kids kind of like, wow, she just said that in church. And I can imagine, and I hope this is true, that the parents are teaching their kids not to say that word because it's not a nice word, and Jesus says it's not a nice word. However, do you realize that the original word, and the NIV, as we had on the screen earlier, uses the Aramaic term raka, R-A-C-A, and that was a word that was much stronger and much more insulting than our word idiot. But it's probably okay that those who translated the New Testament are not translating what the word raka actually meant, because you might end up teaching something that you didn't intend to. But just understand that what Jesus is talking about here is really hate speech. Holding people in contempt. Diminishing their humanity. But let's go on, verse 23. So, if you are presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar, go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your sacrifice to God. Notice the emphasis on reconciliation over worship. We're going to come back to that idea of reconciliation in a few minutes. But for now, just notice that a person could be in the temple fulfilling the law to the letter about how they were supposed to worship and offer their offerings as a sacrifice to God, and they could be so holy and so outwardly righteous. And yet Jesus says, if you've got a problem in your relationship, you better fix that. And there's a couple of ways of interpreting that. One is that Jesus regarded mending your relationships as more important than worship. Or the other way of viewing that is that mending relationships is worship. Think about that for a while. Verse 25. When you are on the way to court with your adversary, settle your differences quickly, Otherwise, your accuser may hand you over to the judge, who will hand you over to an officer, and you will be thrown into prison. And if that happens, you surely won't be free again until you have paid the last penny. What is Jesus saying here? Well, he's saying if you follow the principles of love and reconciliation, there will be practical results for you if you do that in every area of your life. For example, if somebody is taking you to court, make nice with them before you get to court, because it's going to go better for you if you do. In fact, if taken to its logical conclusion, working something out with somebody, you could end up making a friend instead of having an enemy in court. So there's Jesus is saying this whole idea of, practicing love and reconciliation is not just some kind of, holy spirituality that has no practical benefit. No, there are very practical benefits for being a good partner, whether it's in business or anything else, which leads us to the next section, which is about lust and divorce. You have heard the commandment that says, "You must not commit adultery." But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. You have heard the law that says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. But I say that a man who divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. What is going on here? If we look carefully, we can see that the same principle Jesus uses to talk about murder and anger and not taking revenge in court, those same principles of love and reconciliation especially apply in our intimate relationships. Now, I will say, one brief thing about the historical context here. You'll notice that in the text, Jesus addresses this teaching specifically to men. That's because lust, divorce, and remarriage was basically a rich man's game. They're the ones that could afford it. They're the ones that could go to the rabbi and get a rabbi to give them a ruling in favor of getting a divorce, give them the certificate they needed. They're the ones that could afford to marry someone again. And the other thing about this is that it was downright oppressive, emotionally, spiritually, and economically to the women. That's why the text includes this, causes her to commit adultery. Because if a woman was divorced, in order for her to economically survive, she had to attach herself in some way to a man, another man. Now, she could go back to her father, perhaps, and live in his household, but that was not always available either. So there was some... And it kind of raises the interesting possibility that in that situation where Jesus talks to the woman caught in adultery. The Pharisees drag this woman before him and says, Moses says we should stone this person. Of course, they don't drag any men in with her. It's only the woman here. And perhaps she was one of those victims that had been caused to commit adultery. Don't know that, can't prove that, but there's always that possibility. And if that is a possible thing there, then when Jesus says, go and sin no more, he is setting her free from her abusive situation. Just a possibility. I can't prove that, but here's the thing about intimate relationships. There's abuse that goes on that nobody sees. And just because the Pharisees could be outwardly righteous and legal about their affairs, they would never commit adultery literally. They would not even follow the example of some of the patriarchs who had more than one wife at a time. Instead, they worked out a legal way to have one wife after another. It was kind of called serial polygamy. Of course, we don't have that problem today, do we? So, this is what Jesus says. Why does he say it? Why go into all of this explanation about murder and anger and worship, going to court, lust and adultery? What is going on? Why is Jesus doing this? Well, some people say it's the way Jesus fulfills the law, and because Jesus fulfilled the law, then we don't have to. I've actually heard people say that. Well, Jesus did all that, so I don't have to. If you're going to say that, then you really have to grapple with Jesus' other statements where he says, anybody who teaches people not to obey these commandments, is not going to be in the kingdom. So the other possibility is that Jesus is giving new and stricter laws. So he's kind of adding to the Ten Commandments. Now, it's not just murder that is illegal. It's, anger. It's lust. But those are things that can't be described by law, are they? Unless you believe in something called the thought police, you can't make laws against something that happens internally. Now, people have tried it, but it never works out well. The truth of the matter here is Jesus is talking about things that cannot be legislated. They have to come from the heart. So, the little boy in the children's story who had such a hard time controlling his temper, he had to come to the place, thanks to his father's patient training, where he didn't want to lose his temper anymore. And he learned that by, seeing the practical results of it graphically displayed, on the fence, which is just a wonderful visual metaphor. But Jesus is talking about something that you can't make laws about. We should also remember that in the background here are the Pharisees. This whole thing got started. In fact, just before Jesus launches into his "you have heard, but I tell you" statements about the law, he calls out his opponents, the Pharisees. In Matthew 5:20, he says, "But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." So, who are these Pharisees? Who or what were they? Well, in the Bible, it makes it very clear that they are Jesus' opponents. They're the antagonists of Jesus. Now, we should note very quickly that the antagonists of Jesus, his Pharisee opponents, were likely a powerful minority within a much larger group of teachers who were probably mostly sincere and God-fearing. But this powerful minority was concentrated mainly in Jerusalem, and they were very well politically connected. In fact, it is not an exaggeration. It is the absolute truth to say that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were not so much religious groups, they were political parties. You have to remember, even though they were obviously religious leaders, there was no separation between religious and civil leadership. None. So a civil leader was a religious leader was a civil leader. And both Pharisees and Sadducees made up the Sanhedrin. It was in a sense, a two-party system. Now, there was another kind of dominant party in the background, and that was the Herodians and those who were connected with, the sitting king or governor, who was answerable immediately to Rome. But the Pharisees promoted a God and country platform with an emphasis on ritual purity according to the laws of Moses. They were devoutly religious, but they also had a political agenda. Ultimately, their goal was to purify the Jewish religion, keep the corruption of foreigners out, run the country according to the way they interpreted the law, and then hopefully be part of a messianic uprising that would restore Israel as a superpower. And they were quite willing to use violence to do that. Notice what Jesus says in Matthew 23, verses 2-4. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. What is Jesus getting at here? Well, he's not real specific about it, but if we go to other parts of the Gospels, we get a picture of the Pharisees who were quite willing and able to make loopholes in the law to benefit themselves. But they didn't necessarily extend that same benefit to other people. In other words, they were acting like power-hungry people have acted all through Earth's history, and that is, what was defined as good is what was good for them. What was right is what was right for them. They interpreted the law so that they could remain the authorities. And there is a very, amazing archaeological evidence of this called Moses' seat. Now you'll notice in this text that we just read, it talks about the Pharisees who sit in Moses' seat. Most likely, Jesus used that expression metaphorically to mean that the Pharisees claimed the authority of Moses, or they used the authority of Moses to rule over everyone else. But amazingly, there was a literal Moses seat. And we should have a picture of it right now. That is in the Israel Museum, and that little stone chair is called Moses' seat. It was a literal piece of furniture in the synagogue. This happened to be the synagogue of Chorazin, probably from the 4th or 5th century. And we should have a drawing of it here where you can see where Moses' seat is. And then on the other side is another little portico kind of a thing. This is inside the synagogue. And the little portico or alcove on the right would have the ark, they called it, which is a large container for the scrolls of the Torah. And they would take the scroll of the Torah that they were going to read that day, and they would walk it over to Moses' seat where the law would be read. And as Pastor Daniel pointed out a few weeks ago, the common custom was to read the law or read the scriptures standing up, and then they would sit down, in this case on Moses' seat, to deliver what we might call the sermon or the commentary, to deliver the conclusions that the Pharisee, scripture reader, synagogue leader was teaching that day. So this really serves as an amazing literal representation of what Jesus was talking about. They sit in Moses' seat or Moses' chair. The word used for chair here in the Gospels was not the usual Greek word for chair. It came from the Aramaic, but it came into Greek as a word, cathedra. Cathedra was not an ordinary chair. It was more of a chair of authority. It has a corresponding term in Latin, also pronounced cathedra. So when someone speaks ex cathedra, quite literally that means they speak from the chair. And of course, there's been lots of discussions over the years of, papal infallibility connected with that idea of speaking ex cathedra. So Jesus is making a very specific and very powerful charge here against the Pharisees, claiming more authority than they should and being hypocritical about it, for doing what all worldly leaders have done throughout history, and that is rule in a way that benefits yourself, whether it's by interpretations of the law or economic policies or anything like that. Jesus is leveling quite a devastating charge against the Pharisees. And he's saying to people, don't be like that. Well, if we're not supposed to be like that, then what are we supposed to be like? How do we relate to the law? Well, Jesus had that discussion with the Pharisees on occasion. One of those occasions is in Matthew 22, starting with verse 35, One of them, Pharisees, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with this question. Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Jesus always points to the underlying principles of the law. The law, according to Jesus, was never intended to be an end in itself. The law cannot save anyone. It simply points to the underlying moral principles of love, compassion, and respect. So behind all of this, or through all of this discussion about murder and anger and worship and legal action and lust and divorce and remarriage, through all of that, what Jesus is trying to do is bring us back to the original underlying principles that form the foundation of all law, and those are the principles of love, compassion, and respect. If that's the case, then I think we can take heart, in a way, because we realize that what Jesus' teaching is all about is about those principles: love, compassion, respect. The principles that are taught in the Beatitudes, beginning with, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Basically, Jesus goes through several Beatitudes there, saying, "Blessed are the losers, because I claimed them." And he goes on through showing how he extends mercy to people. The kingdom of heaven is a place of mercy. But there's also a problem here, because when we hear what the actual deep principles are that the law points us to, or that Jesus points us to, we realize how much we need a Savior. Let's look at the passage again, this time in the Leno unauthorized version, LUV. The Ten Commandments have been the standard for a long time. And you know what they say. Remember the sixth commandment? Thou shalt not murder. Anyone who murders someone will be held accountable and will be judged. But by the authority of God, I tell you, the written commandment is not an end in itself. Instead, it points to the underlying principles of love, compassion, and respect. Therefore, anyone who weaponizes their anger, embraces prejudice, uses hate speech, or in any way diminishes the value of another human being will receive the same cruel judgments they have so willingly given to others. And don't think that your sacrifices and worship services cover you when you violate the principles of love, compassion, and respect. You honor God best when you make things right with those you have hurt, hated, or disrespected. So if you are about to offer a sacrifice at the temple and you suddenly remember that your brother or sister has a problem with you, leave your gift right where it is in front of the altar. Drop everything and go and do what's most important to God, which is mending your relationships. Reconcile with your brother or sister, even if you think you're the righteous one. Practicing love, compassion, and respect makes things a lot better than practicing hate or even seeking legal revenge. For example, if you can settle things peacefully rather than going to court, you may avoid a judgment against you as well as financial ruin. Furthermore, you might even turn your adversary into a friend. Reconciliation is always better for everyone than seeking legal remedies. All good relationships are based on the principles of love, compassion, and respect. As with the law against murder, obeying the letter of the law against adultery does not make you a moral or loving person. So don't think you can imagine trading your spouse for someone else who happens to catch your fickle eye or who might enhance your social status. Even if you don't plan to act on your fantasy, in your heart, you are already abusive. Abusive to the one you promised to love. And chances are, if you cherish such thoughts, you will act on them and betray your beloved. You will divorce your spouse in order to have the object of your fantasy. Whether or not it is legal or not is beside the point. The result is heartbreaking, immoral, and abusive. So, my friends, what are we to think? What are we to do? These are hard sayings. They cut to the heart. First, let's look at the obvious. Jesus effectively points out that the law does not produce righteousness. Good people can make laws, but laws cannot make good people. True love and morality must come from the heart. So, here's the last question. What does Jesus do with angry, hateful, prejudiced, and unfaithful people? He dies for them. By his faithful love, our love is awakened. By his sacrificial love, we are forgiven and transformed. We will be better. We can live not according to the law, but according to God's love, compassion, and respect.
I'm Pastor Tara Van Cross, and we're so glad that you're here as a part of this Azure Hills Church community. Please like and subscribe, and click the bell to be notified for when we share new videos. Would you also pray over giving to support this ministry? AzureHills.org/give is the place to go. We pray for you regularly, that God would continue to move and work in your life.